Welcome to the Technology Alchemist, your source for technology advice, strategic technology planning, technology coaching, time-saving advice, and a pragmatic look at increasing revenue and profit through your technology engine. I'm your host, the Technology Alchemist himself, Mike Mahoney. Today's episode is brought to us by VP Virtual Assistants. When you need someone to help with the workload, VP Virtual Assistants can help you out. Schedule a call or send in your needs at vpvirtualassistants.com. Today's guest is Terry Boyle McDougall, an executive and career coach and CEO of Terry B. McDougall Coaching. She helps high-achieving professionals remove obstacles that keep them stuck so they can enjoy more success and satisfaction in their lives and careers. Before becoming a coach, Terry was a longtime corporate marketing executive where she led teams, developed strategies, and advised senior leaders to drive business results. She's the author of Winning the Game of Work, Career Happiness and Success on Your Terms. She's also the host of the Marketing Mambo podcast. Welcome to the show.
Mike, thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm really glad you're here. So tell me, how did you get into executive coaching? I mean, from a marketing position into a coaching position, how did that happen?
Well, I had actually hired coaches a couple times in my career, and they'd been really helpful to me. And I suppose that, going back, sorry, my dog is about ready to get a bone.
No worries.
That was going to be loud. She's giving me the dirty look here. I'm the oldest of 4 girls, so I was the big sister. So I always liked helping. I've always been somebody that enjoyed problem solving. And when I was a marketing leader, I found that it just made a lot of sense to invest my time in mentoring and coaching on my teams. And so when I was at my last job, I was there for about 12 years. And as I say, about 10 of those 12 years were fantastic. And then the last 2 years, I was in a role that I didn't apply for, I didn't really want, I tried to say no to, but how often in the corporate world, we're voluntold, like, no, you're going to be in this role.
Yeah.
I never really enjoyed that role. And so I kind of got to a crossroads where I was really looking at myself and saying, what do I like to do and what am I good at? Because I kind of felt like I was outgrowing the marketing opportunities that I saw in front of me. And, when I really looked deep, I was like, I love coaching and mentoring. I'm good at it. I've led great teams that were highly engaged. So I actually decided to leave my corporate job and get a certification in coaching. At first, I kind of looked at it like a sabbatical, and I thought I'll just have a few clients as a side hustle and get another job. But I finally decided to go ahead and start my own business, and that was 4 years ago. And here I am.
That's awesome. I mean, I actually come from a similar background, only through technology, and same thing. I always find myself teaching other people things and mentoring people. And about 13 years ago, I started coaching just smaller startup entrepreneurs. So that's interesting. How do you find the skills you used as a marketing executive? How do those tend to apply to your coaching business?
Surprisingly, almost completely directly, because as a marketing director, my job was to sit down with the business leaders, understand their problems, work with them to brainstorm and come up with plans of how we were going to get from point A to point B, and then to make it happen. And that's exactly what I do as a coach. I sit down with my clients, help them get clarity on their goals, build that roadmap to get from point A to point B. If we need to develop skills, we're working on that as well, and to get them in the right mindset to take the action to achieve those goals. So it's interesting because honestly, I think it was on another podcast that I drew, I connected the dots so directly. I was like, oh, well, no wonder this feels so natural, because I've done it for 30 years, just in a different context.
Yeah, I agree. I even think, like, as a technology professional for so many years, same kind of thing. You're constantly explaining things to people and showing them how things work. and having to figure out, like, I got dubbed the most user-friendly technologist because I spoke plain English to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a skill that translates really well into coaching, is if you can take a problem and break it down in simple terms, like kind of
Mm-hmm.
explain it to a 5-year-old sort of way,
Yeah.
you get great success. So what do you think, how to word this, what is like the biggest challenge you have as an executive coach?
I think probably the biggest challenge or the biggest pattern maybe that I run into with people is that, I'm working with these people that are already successful. And I think that they tend to sometimes just rely too much on their own personal strengths and don't learn how to really use all of the resources that they have at their disposal. And, you know, I call it kind of the superhero syndrome, right? That it's like Superman's going to fly in and save the day. And, that's fine every once in a while, but, it gets exhausting if that's your number one go-to approach to solving problems. And it also can leave the teams feeling discouraged, right? And so, when people have been talented individual contributors or lower level managers, as they get promoted, a lot of times they forget to mentally promote themselves to that next level. And so, just helping them to learn how to build that bridge from where they are in all of their competence and to really step back and understand, like, how do I teach somebody else to do what I do? It doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. And, sometimes it can actually even end up causing a lot of issues and negativity on teams because the boss gets frustrated because other people aren't as competent as they are, and then they start, maybe sort of bullying or being mean to people about, like, well, how come you can't do this? And the reality is that because you haven't taught anybody how to do this, and you're so close to your abilities that you're not able to step back and understand that not everybody can do this just off the bat, right? And
Yeah.
so just I think that self-awareness, and part of that is actually even them valuing themselves, because sometimes they don't give themselves enough credit for the fact that they are very often extraordinary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think what you say about them forgetting to promote themselves, I think it's a really common thing that you see in like retail and restaurant environments, or like Starbucks, is they'll hire somebody, they'll be a cashier, they'll be a barista or whatever, and then they give them a promotion, but they don't really change their mindset to that new position. They're still the barista, and so they're a
Mm-hmm.
little too buddy with everybody, and
Mm-hmm.
they get themselves in trouble. That's pretty common in those environments. I used to work retail way back, and um, that was something, I remember as a store manager, I would have to work on with people. Like, you'd promote them to a bigger position, and then you'd have to remind them that now this is your role. You're not
Mm-hmm.
like you're not part of the clerk group anymore, you're part of
Mm-hmm.
this group. And I
You're
know
management.
it
Yeah, you're
sounds elite.
management now.
Yeah, it sounds elitist, but really, obviously, the difference is you have to start acting like a leader now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all too often people want to act like a boss and not a leader. So, like,
Yeah.
do you perceive a difference between how a boss acts and how a leader would act?
Yeah, absolutely. A boss a lot of times is, somebody who's bullying and coercing and forcing and, using their positional authority to make people do things. Versus a leader is, I talk about this so often, with a leader is somebody who is, painting the picture of the vision of where we're going. So everybody's clear on what the goal is, and then also putting it in context for each of the people on the team so they know what their part is in achieving that goal. That's exciting. If somebody's like, if you think about, winning sports team, right? Like, everybody has their position and they know what that position is. They know what they're supposed to do to meet expectations. And that's what a good leader does, is they make sure that everybody understands what their part is in winning. right? And then
Yeah.
if you've done a good job of that, you actually don't have to boss people around. You just have to, hold up the, you know, the light and lead the way, right? And people will
Right.
follow you.
I actually have a client who we've really been working hard on leadership skills. It's one of these people who doesn't see themselves as a leader. But
Hmm.
then recently came back last week with a story that there was a conflict, boss and one of her team members, boss questioning some things and saying that the task was clear, etc. My client reviewed everything and came back to the boss and stood up to the boss and said, you know what? I see how you could think that that was clear, but from
Right.
my perspective, here's what I see.
Yeah.
So I don't think that you should be blaming her for this problem. What I think we should be doing is making this instruction much more
Hmm.
crystal clear.
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, there you go. There's proof of your
That's
leadership abilities,
leadership.
because leaders will also get the respect of the higher up people as well.
Yes.
I mean, if you're not a leader, they see that and they sort of,
Hmm.
you're getting the job done for them, but you're not really growing a team. And I think that's another key. Leaders lead to growth of other people.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely. I agree with that.
I mean, just look at political leaders that put people in positions that maybe were political rivals before, but they know that
Hmm.
that's a person that can get the job done
Yes.
without them having to babysit, so they give it to them. So that's
Right. Right.
so typically, what are the problems your clients are seeking to solve when they come to you?
Well, it it's usually something that's painful to them, right? So it could be anything from, and usually it's something that they're avoiding. It could be that um, they aren't getting along with somebody that they need to get along with, and there's been a lot of conflict, and it gives them an ulcer because they feel like they can't just do what they naturally want to do because there's fear around dealing with somebody directly. Um, it often is, I mentioned this earlier, but it's often that they're not using all of the leverage points that are available to them. That, I talk about this in my book, Winning the Game of Work, is when people aren't they're not leveraging all of the resources they have. It's sort of like a brick mason, going and carrying the bricks one by one to the job site rather than going and using a wheelbarrow to bring them all at once, right? Like it gets the job done, but it's a very inefficient way of doing that. And there are a lot of examples of that. Now, the funny thing about that is that most of the time people don't recognize that that's really what the issue is. It's sort of like, going to the doctor and like you have symptoms in one part of your body. Like my husband, for example, like years ago, he was in a car accident and he had all these neck problems. And when he finally went to the doctor, they discovered that he had like hurt a muscle like further down in his back, and so it was showing up in his neck, right? But a lot of times, like where we feel it is not actually where the root of the problem is. I'm trying to think. Like another thing is just like what you said earlier, like showing up like a leader. Sometimes people are frustrated because they're trying to please too many people, right? They don't want to cause any conflict or rock the boat. But I always look at it like if you're doing it in service of reaching a goal and you're doing it, you're being clear about what the issues are, and you're you know approaching people with the belief that if you can get together you can make it better, that's okay. Sometimes people aren't going to be happy about things that happen at work, and we've got to grow a bit of thicker skin to put up with that in service of reaching the goals that we have for the business.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think I wish more businesses would see the value in having a coach for their executives. I know
Mm-hmm.
the best full-time job I ever had was also the last full-time job I ever had. And they provided, there were 6 of us on the executive team. And this is an interesting company because when I first joined the company, there were 3 owners, 2 brothers, and their best friend. And then there
Okay.
was the CFO. That was the management team. And they would never get anything accomplished because the CFO would come in with a reasonable, hey, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, and then they'd override him on the vote. And
Oh, okay.
so they, somewhere along the line, they found a management consulting firm who they believed in and started meeting with them on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And they, first thing they told them was, you need to expand your executive team. You need to
Mm-hmm.
bring in more of your directors into
Yeah.
this. And so they did. And then over time, they started giving each of us directors an hour a week with a business coach.
Mm-hmm.
And we had probably the strongest management team I've ever worked with, because everybody operated on a different level. There was a certain respect that was there. Everything just
Yeah.
worked really well. And I've actually used things I've learned from 20 years ago there in my
Yeah.
current business, because I mean it's timeless. Some of the
Oh,
techniques are
yeah.
just timeless. But do you find that does the employee usually have to pay for your services, or does the business that they work for pay, or is it a mixture of both?
I would say probably 2/3 of the clients that I work with, their company pays for it. And
That's awesome.
then, some of my clients pay for it by themselves. And often, not all the time, but often the people that pay for it by themselves are either at a crossroads where they're not sure if they want to continue doing what they're doing, or they're definitely in job search. So because I work with people that want to be more effective in the role, are at that crossroads, or are looking for a job. And it's funny, the people at the crossroads, they typically, about 50% of them, once they learn some new skills, will fall back in love with their job. And then about 50% will say, yeah, this environment isn't
Made up their mind.
going to work. It doesn't matter what I do. It's not going to work. I'm leaving. So it's interesting. Going back to that question you asked me earlier about like what are some of the biggest issues, another one that I see a lot is leaders who don't have a hard time getting the balance right between support and challenge of their employees. Like some managers are just, they'll mollycoddle their folks, and it ends up with people feeling like the manager actually doesn't believe in them, because the manager will come in and be like, oh, it's just quicker for me to do that, or I want to protect them from having to deal with these issues. So they're running interference all the time for their employees, rather than giving them more challenge and then helping them figure out how to do it. Or sometimes you've got the opposite, where they're piling tons of work on people, but they're not, like, much like the example you used, that they're not aware of the fact that they actually haven't outfitted the folks to be able to take on that challenge. They haven't trained
Yeah.
them. Maybe they just are assuming somebody should know how to do something. So getting that balance right really liberates the teams to have a lot of confidence and move forward towards the goals a lot more easily. And that really does require that the leader elevate themselves so that they can see the entire playing field, rather than being in the middle of the scrum.
Yeah, I agree. I actually had another client who was complaining that one of their direct reports would continually ask them, like, where's the link to that document? Where's this? Where's that? And he's like, it's in the instructions. He's telling me, I don't understand why they don't find it. Well, what do you do? Well, I give them the link. So, well, why don't you try this?
Yeah.
Next time, say, go back to the instructions.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
tell them that. And he's like, well, I don't understand what good that's going to do. Just try it. Just try it.
Yeah, I used to always tell, even whenever I was working, I'd say, don't be the path of least resistance.
Yeah,
And
that's a great way to
exactly
put
what
it.
he was doing. He's being the path of least resistance. I had one client, when she first started working with me, she'd gotten promoted from running a team of 8 to being the director of a department of 50. And she did not mentally elevate herself to do that. And she was trying to, jump in and be a player coach on so many different things, that she was working like 70 plus hours a week. And the first thing that we did, that we agreed that she would do when we first started working together, is that she would close her office door for 2 hours a day. And maybe a little bit like the guy you were just talking about, that she resisted. She was like, well, what are people going to think if I close my door? I pride myself on being an open door manager. But she couldn't get any of her own work done because people were coming. It was like a constant, parade of people in and out of her office. And, I said, well, if you feel like you need to tell people that you're closing your door because you need to get your work done, just tell them that. But it made a huge difference. Once she opened her door, there were fewer people coming to her because they had either figured it out or they had asked somebody else. And I think it's really important for leaders to value their time, right? If you need to be focusing your energy on your highest value work,
Right.
not doing something that somebody who gets paid less could do.
Well, and I'll give you a similar example to what you just gave. When I was working for that last job, I was the CTO. So I would get people coming, and we had like our own internal software that we wrote. So there was a lot of questions about, can it do this? And can we make it do this? And people would stop by my office and they'd say, do you have 5 minutes? And I'd say, sure. And like an hour and a half later, we'd still be talking. And so my business coach said, go to Radio Shack and get a timer. Let's get a digital timer. And when they said you have 5 minutes, put 5 minets on the timer and set it down on the table.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, that's so awkward. Why would I want to do that? But I thought he said to do it. So I'm like the type, like if when I had back surgery, my doctor said, don't go up the stairs for 2 weeks. It wasn't until the 15th day that I went upstairs. Like I made sure 2 weeks. I could have done it at 10. Well. Could have done it at 10, but I stuck it out. So I put the clock down. You know what happened was I gained control of my time back because when the timer would go off, I'd say, oh, that's been 5 minutes. Obviously it's going to take longer. We need to schedule an appointment. Well, what happened was over time, one of my friends said, all you're going to be doing is setting that stupid timer constantly. Well, actually what happened was just what you said. People realized, oh, he's not willing to just let me talk forever. Right. So I better just set an appointment and then we can have a conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
And people sabotage you by coming and requesting time with you without actually officially putting it on your calendar because there's no end time, is how I see it. Like they could keep
it's so
pushing.
True. It's so true. I kind of going back to that, what I said earlier about don't be the path of least resistance. I really coach a lot of my folks to learn how to say no. And many people are, very much people pleasers and they don't want to say no. They don't want to disappoint people. But I just tell them, like, look, the first no is the hardest because once you say no once, people will think twice about coming by and saying, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Right. And I think the other thing too is that they will think like, well, should I go and ask her and maybe have her tell me no, or should I try to figure it out for myself? I think I'll try to figure it out for myself because I don't want somebody to tell me no. And it's, it's funny. I have 3 kids, and not to, say that people in the corporate world are children or anything like that, but we're all human, right? And there's a lot of similarities into like how you teach kids, right? Like,
yes,
if you a lot of times have to tell them no a few times and then they learn to do something else.
Well, you're right. You've said a couple of times, we're all humans, and that's exactly it. What works with children will work with adults too, if as long as you handle it in the correct context, because a lot of times it's going back to the basics, right? It's teaching people that, they've learned from somebody somewhere that it's okay to walk into someone's office and say, hey, you got 5 minutes, and then take as much time as they want, because no one's ever stopped them. You almost can't blame them for that. But if you teach them that your time is your time and it's valuable to you, that completely changes the dynamic, and then they start to respect your time as well. It's like, the saying, how can you expect someone to love you if you don't love yourself? Well, how can you expect someone to respect your time if you don't respect your time? You have to show that respect for your time.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And, when you were talking about that situation earlier about, hey, do you have 5 minutes? It reminds me of a time much earlier in my career when I was a printing production manager, and I worked in this department with a bunch of marketing managers. And when they were ready for something to kind of come into production, that's what we called it, they would just stop by my desk at all hours of the day, right? And be like, hey, I'm ready to put this into production now. And at first I would just stop all the time and be like, okay, but it really disrupted my day. And so And it was frustrating. But what we ended up doing was just every day at 4 o'clock was the production hour. And people could sign up on the conference room door. You know, me and the art director would go in and we would receive the project into production. And it just took control of the process, right? So they knew that we'd be there every day at 4 o'clock. We didn't get frustrated because we weren't being interrupted all day. And, you know, I think sometimes we just have to stop and say to ourselves, like, okay, if I don't like this situation, what can I do about it, right? And it can feel like, oh, these people aren't going to be happy with it. But the reality was that the solution that we came up with in that situation was probably better for everybody. Because, you know, they could be coming by my office at lunchtime or, you know, whatever. They knew what to expect, right? 4 o'clock in the conference room, come in the order that you signed up, and there you go.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more organized. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you being here. Why don't you let people know where they can find you if they want to reach out?
Sure. People can go to my website. It's terrybmcdougall.com. I've got a blog out there. I've got a couple chapters of my book out there if you want to check that out. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, and my handle on LinkedIn is Terry B. McDougall. I'd be happy to get linked in with anybody who is listening to your podcast. And then my book, Winning the Game of Work, is available on Amazon and at barnesandnoble.com, both as an ebook and a paperback. And then finally, if there are any of your technology listeners that also are interested in marketing, I have a podcast which is called Marketing Mambo, and it can be found on all of the podcast platforms and also at marketingmambo.net.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to check that out myself. I've been working a lot on the marketing aspect of my skill set, which was pretty much non-existent before I had my own business. So something I have to learn and understand better. But thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You've been a great guest. This has been another episode of the Technology Alchemist.